Chapter 54. This venerable one squabbles over pastries. Shizun? Chu Wanning's expression immediately became more respectful. Out of everybody on Xixing Peak, he's the only one who doesn't have any nicknames. No one would dare joke about him. Bullshit. That's only because everyone knows that you like Shizun, so they just hold their tongues around you. Moran rolled his eyes and pulled Chu Wanning over as he stage whispered. Don't listen to him. I'll tell you, out of everybody on Xixing Peak, the Yuheng Elder has more nicknames than anyone. Oh? Really? Chu Wanning lifted his eyebrows slightly, intrigued. For example? For example, one of the more courteous ones would be Bai Wuchang. Why do they call him that? Because day in and day out, he only ever wears white. What else is there? Little Napa Cabbage. Why? Because day in and day out, he only ever wears white. What else? Big Mantu. Why? Because day in and day out, he only ever wears white. What else is there? Little Widow. Chu Wanning stared in incredulity. Do you know why they call him that? Moran asked, perfectly oblivious to the flicker of murderous intent in Chu Wanning's eyes. He only continued to laugh stupidly, because day in and day out, he only ever wears white. If it weren't for his self-control, Chu Wanning probably wouldn't have been able to maintain his composure. Well, what else is there? Yeah. Moran glanced at Chu Wanning's expression and said in a low voice, If I say any more, I'm afraid that my cousin here might pour the entire hot pot over my head. Chu Wanning slapped the table, gnashing his teeth. That's ridiculous. Who allowed them to make fun of Shizun like that? What do you mean, little Napa Cabbage and Big Mantu? Not to mention Little Widow. Are they sick of being alive? Moran replied, barely able to contain his laughter. Mad already? You haven't even heard what the female disciples call him yet. It'll give you goosebumps. Chu Wanning's eyes widened. What do they call him? Well, what else? Moran drawled lazily. They're girls, after all. Everything out of their mouths is flowery. It's all pear blossom bathed in pale moonlight this, and untrodden snow of early spring that. Or else it's Sir Chu of Lin An, purest of all lotus blossoms, and stuff likening him to the legendary beauty of Shishi, my god. Chu Wanning had no words. Chu Wanning had even fewer. Those nicknames are still fine, in comparison. Look at the Tanlang Elder, he gets way worse. What with his terrible temper and mediocre looks. Out of all the 20 elders on Xixing Peak, the Tanlang Elder was the one with whom Chu Wanning had the worst relationship. So he asked, What do they call him? Something like wintertime pickles or mustard greens, because his skin is dark. Moran laughed. Mang, don't make that face at me. You have your fair share of nicknames too. Chu Wanning looked like he'd just swallow a whole egg. What? Me too? Of course, Moran said, grinning. Chu Wanning cleared his throat, feigning a casual attitude. Well, what do they call me? Fanny. Why? What do you mean why? Isn't it obvious? Moran couldn't even make it 3 words in before his shoulders started to shake with laughter, until he eventually burst out cackling, slapping the table. You're like a peacock, fanning its tail feathers everywhere. Chu Wanning bounced to his feet, howling in anger. Moran, I'm gonna kill you! By the time the 3 of them had eaten and drunk their fill and made their way back to Xixing Peak, it was past midnight. Chu Wanning allowed himself to be escorted by these 2 dumb disciples to the quarters of the Xuanji Elder, where they parted ways. Before leaving, Chu Wanning asked if they could meet again tomorrow at the bamboo forest, but Chu Wanning, not knowing when he might return to his original form, thought it best not to commit and only said that he'd come by if he had free time. Chu Wanning waited until the two disciples had gone far enough away, and only then did he use his qinggong to fly up lightly, stepping along the edges of roof tiles to make his way back toward the Red Lotus Pavilion. Early the next morning, Chu Wanning woke to find himself still stuck in a child's body and couldn't help but feel slightly dispirited. Pulling a face, he stepped onto a wooden stool and glared at the person in the mirror for a long while, unable to bring himself to do so much as properly comb his hair. After some consideration, he concluded that this really couldn't go on any longer, and so he set off to find Chu Chengyong.
What? You saw Menger and Runner yesterday?
Yes, I said that I was the Chuanji elder's disciple, and they didn't seem to doubt it.
Chu Wanning said.
If Shomang comes asking you about me, remember to cover for me. More importantly, I've been cultivating for more than 10 days, and nothing has really changed. This isn't working. I'll have to ask Tanlang to take a look after all.
Oh, what happened to our Yuheng and his thin face, being too embarrassed to ask for help?
Chu Wanning shot him a cold glance. However, when such a look came from a young child, it wasn't the least bit imposing. Rather, it looked like the child was pitching a fit. Chu Wanning was quite adorable as a kid, and Chu Chengyong couldn't resist reaching out to pat his head.
Sect leader, Chu Wanning said suddenly. When my body returns to normal, could you ask Silk Rinse Hall to tailor a new set of Xisheng Peak robes for me? Not white.
Chu Chengyong was entirely taken by surprise.
I thought you didn't like wearing light armor.
Just changing my wardrobe up a little,
Chu Wanning said with a dark expression as he walked away. Although the Tanlang elder wasn't on good terms with Chu Wanning, he had to hold himself back a little bit in the presence of the sect leader. However, though his words remained civil, his derision was evident from his gaze. Chu Wanning raised his eyes, expressionlessly watching the Tanlang elder. Tanlang's eyes were shining with glee, almost like fireworks were going off within them. Chu Wanning continued to stare expressionlessly. The Tanlang elder let go of Chu Wanning's wrist after taking his pulse.
Madame Wang's diagnosis was more or less correct.
Chu Wanning yanked his hand away and tucked his sleeve down.
Then why has there been no change even after 10 days?
You might not have absorbed much sap from the ancient willow, but it was potent. I'm afraid that it might be quite a long time before you return to your original form.
How long will it take?
Chu Wanning asked casually.
Not sure, but probably about 10 years.
Chu Wanning's eyes instantly widened. The Tanlang elder tried his best to keep a straight face, but his own eyes were brimming with glee at Chu Wanning's misfortune.
Yes, it's probably going to take another 10 years before you reclaim your original form.
Chu Wanning stared at him for a while, then said darkly,
Are you kidding me?
Perish the thought, you are the Yuheng elder after all.
Tanlang smiled.
Anyway, if you ask me, there's nothing really wrong with you. This is good, even. Your body may be smaller, and your mental age slightly more immature, but only slightly, mind you. But your cultivation is intact. Why the rush to return to normal?
Chu Wanning, ashen-faced, was left unable to reply.
However, there's no guarantee that you'll stay in this child's form for the entirety of these 10 years. This variety of tree sap migrates along the same path as your spiritual energy. If you were to refrain from using any spiritual techniques for 3 to 5 months, you would likely be able to recover your original form. That works too.
Chu Chengyong's eyes lit up with hope, but Tanlang continued with a faint smile.
Hold up, sect leader, I'm not done explaining yet. Even if the Yuheng elder returned to his adult form thusly, he would be unable to use too many techniques, because once his spiritual energy was depleted from overuse, the willow sap would again exert its influence and he would turn back into a child. Overuse? How much would count as too much? Chu Wanning exclaimed. About that, since the sap has already spread throughout his entire body, at most, he'd only be able to use 2 techniques per day.
Chu Wanning spoke in a voice that was as cold and hard as steel. The barrier to the ghost realm constantly develops breaches in need of repair, and forging automatons also requires spiritual energy. If I could only use 2 techniques a day, I'd be as good as useless.
Well, that's all I've got.
Tanlang's voice dripped with sarcasm.
After all, if the mortal realm were to lose the Baidu immortal, the sun might fail to rise on the morrow.
On the side, Chu Wanning fretted.
Tanlang, quit sneering already. Your medical techniques are among the foremost in the cultivation world. Please, think of something. Even if Yu Heng's cultivation hasn't been affected, he's still in a child's body, so his abilities simply aren't what they were. Not to mention, if the other sects hear that Yu Heng was injured at Jinchen Lake, they might think to try something funny. 10 years is way too long. Could you look for some medicines or something? Some that could maybe...
The Tanlang sneered and interrupted him mid-sentence.
Sect leader, the sap that infected the Baidu immortal is from an ancient tree spirit, not some common poison. Do you really think that I could just come up with a cure on the spot?
Chu Wanning was stunned silent.
That's enough for now. I have to go extract medicine for pills.
Tanlang said languidly.
Why don't you two see yourselves out?
Tanlang! Chu Wanning wanted to say more, but Chu Wanning tugged on the hem of his robes. Sect leader, let's go. When they reached the door, Tanlang's voice suddenly carried to them from behind.
Chu Wanning, if you're willing to back me properly and humbly, then who knows? I might be willing to help derive a cure. Although I've never seen someone with your condition, I might not necessarily be able to assist. So why don't you think about it carefully?
After a long moment, Chu Wanning looked backward. What would count as properly and humbly? Tanlang reclined on the couch, lazily sorting out the bundles of silver needles on the table. He raised his eyes at the sound of Chu Wanning's voice, disdain apparent in his gaze.
When other people are at the end of their rope, they get on their knees to prostrate themselves or to beg for help. We're colleagues, so I won't ask you to get down and knock your head on the floor, but if you kneel and grovel a little, I'll consider it.
Chu Wanning said nothing as he gazed indifferently at him. Only after a while did he say, Wintertime pickles, you must be dreaming. With that, Chu Wanning flicked his sleeves and left. The Tanlang elder was left stunned, unable to figure out what wintertime pickles meant even after half a day of pondering. The days trickled by slowly. The Yu Heng elder declared that he was going into seclusion to meditate, when he was in actuality trapped in the body of a child, unable to return to his original form. Chu Wanning, Madame Wang, and the Tanlang elder had found out about it one after another, and, to prevent the secret's exposure, the Xuanji elder was also informed. A few months passed in the blink of an eye. The Red Lotus Pavilion's doors had been closed to visitors for quite a while, and Shu Meng and his fellow disciples worried despite themselves.
Shizun has been in seclusion for more than 70 days now. Why hasn't he come out yet?
Maybe he's refining his cultivation level. Xia took a sip of spiritual mountain dew from his cup and looked up at the dark, overcast skies outside the window. Looks like it's going to snow. Soon it'll be the new year. I wonder if Shizun will come out before then. Moran was flipping lazily through a manual of sword techniques.
Doubt it,
he said in response to Xia. Didn't he send us a message with his haitang flower a couple days ago to say that it would be a while yet? I doubt he'll be out in time. It was a day of rest on Xisheng Peak when the disciples didn't need to practice cultivation. Moran, Shu Meng, and Xia had gathered to enjoy some freshly brewed tea and warmed wine. The bamboo curtains of the small pavilion in the yard were half drawn, the heavy screens concealing its occupants, and steam wafted lightly from beneath the fringe. There had been a new addition to their little group of late, the Xuanji elder's disciple, Xia Sini. Ever since that day he met Chu Wanning had dragged the kid along to cultivate or play every couple of days, and before long the group had become inseparable. Thus, the Yuheng elders' group of 3 disciples mysteriously became a group of 4. At this moment, Chu Wanning, as Xia Sini, was seated at the table eating pastries. He ate in a refined manner, but the speed at which he consumed them wasn't the least bit lacking. Chu Wanning glanced at him inadvertently and paused in surprise, doing a double take between the plate and Xia Sini.
"Wow, Xiaoshidi,"
he said in amazement.
"Who'd you inherit that bottomless stomach from?"
Chu Wanning was chewing leisurely on a piece of osmanthus cake. The cake was delicious, and he didn't bother responding to Chu Wanning. After all, he was fighting with somebody over the food. Moran and Chu Wanning's hands landed on the last piece of crispy lotus pastry at the same time. Their eyes shot up, and it seemed as if lightning crackled between their gazes. "Let go," said Chu Wanning.
"Nope,"
Moran replied.
"Hands off!"
"You've already eaten 8 pieces. This one's mine."
"You can have any of the others, just not the lotus pastry."
Moran glared at the little fellow for a while before pulling out his trump card. "Shidi, if you eat too many sweets, you'll get cavities."
"That's fine."
Chu Wanning was very calm.
"I'm 6, so it wouldn't be embarrassing."
Moran was struck speechless. There was a loud smack as Chu Wanning's strike landed alongside his scathing complaints.
"Why, you, how annoying can you get? Fighting with Shidi for food? How old are you?"
The moment Moran covered his head with an "Ayo!" Chu Wanning snatched the lotus pastry, his hands quick and face expressionless. He felt quite satisfied as he took a small bite.
"Shidi!"
Chu Wanning ignored him, totally devoted to nibbling on his sweets. The 4 disciples were busily making a ruckus when a sharp whistle pierced the skies and reverberated throughout Xixing Peak. Chu Wanning's expression grew solemn.
"The gathering whistle?"
Chu Wanning lifted the hanging curtains halfway up to look outside the window. The disciples who had been walking outside stopped in their tracks to look around with expressions of surprise. At the sound of the gathering whistle, everyone on Xixing Peak had to gather in the square before Loyalty Hall. As one might guess, this meant that the whistle was only blown in times of emergency. Before Chu Wanning had joined the sect, this whistle had sounded often, whenever the ghost realm barrier was breached. However, since Chu Wanning's arrival, the whistle hadn't been heard in a long, long time. Shimei put down the book in his hand and got up to walk to Chu Wanning's side. How strange. What could be so urgent?
"I don't know. No point wondering. Let's go take a look first."
Only Moran was silent. He pressed his lips together and his lashes fluttered downward, covering the unnatural flicker flashing through his eyes. He knew what this whistle foretold. However, the timing slightly differed from his memory of the event. He hadn't thought that it would happen so soon. The 4 disciples assembled at Xixing Peak, where the rest of the disciples arrived one after another. Before long, the entirety of Loyalty Square was filled with the sect elders and their disciples. Once everyone had gathered, Chuo Chengyong walked out from the tightly shut doors of Loyalty Hall to stand before the jade-banded platform railing, above flights of limestone steps. 6 beautiful women followed behind him. Some looked charming, while the others seemed cold. But all were impossibly gorgeous. They stood against the wind, wearing only thin silk robes, despite the bitterly frigid weather. At a glance, their red skirts were like unto the clouds at dawn, and their eyes seemed lit with scarlet flames, amidst the delicate fluttering of silken ribbons. Finally, A red dot in the shape of a flame lay between each of their eyebrows. Chu Wanning was stunned, and it wasn't only him. The expressions of just about every person in the square changed once they laid eyes on the 6 women. Chu Wanning stared blankly for a moment before he managed to speak, his voice trembling.
Envoys of the feathered tribe. Did they come from Chuke, the land of immortals?